All right, so we're diving deep today into mastering the American accent. You guys requested this one, and we found this awesome YouTube language learning guide that really breaks it all down.
Yeah, it's really interesting how much we take for granted when we speak.
Yeah, we just kind of do it.
Yeah, it's like we never stop to think about all the moving pieces.
Exactly. But this guide really gets into those building blocks, like the vowels and consonants we use every single day. It's like, oh yeah, I know those. But then when you see them laid out like that,
You start to realize there's a lot more to it.
totally.
Mhm.
Like I was fascinated by the example they gave with the sound,
Mhm.
think versus
Yeah.
this.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic one. Those are what we call voiced and voiceless consonants. It all comes down to whether your vocal cords vibrate.
Voice and voiceless, okay.
Mhm.
So like, how can you tell the difference?
Well, it's actually pretty cool. Try putting your fingers lightly on your throat. When you say think, do you feel that?
Not really.
Now try this.
Oh, I can feel the vibration on that one.
Exactly. You could literally feel the sound.
Wow, that's so cool. I never realized you could actually feel the difference.
It's pretty neat, right?
Definitely. Makes you think about all the other sounds we make and how it all works.
Right. And the guide goes on to talk about word stress, which is another really important element.
Oh yeah, word stress. That could totally change the meaning of a word, right?
Absolutely. Like that classic example of record.
Record the noun versus record the verb.
Exactly. Just by shifting the stress, you completely change the word's meaning.
It's wild. It's like a secret code embedded within the word itself.
Totally. And it's something native speakers do naturally, but for language learners, it can be a real challenge.
Oh, I bet. And the guide also used photograph and photography as another example of that.
Right. Same idea, different stress patterns.
It makes me realize how much I rely on context to understand what someone's
I mean,
saying.
definitely context is huge.
Like if someone said record with the wrong stress, I might totally misunderstand them.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really important element, intonation.
Oh, intonation. The guide describes it as the music of language.
Yeah, it's like the melody of how we speak.
So it's not just about the words themselves, but how we deliver them.
Precisely. It's the rise and fall of our voice, the pauses, the emphasis we put on certain words. It all adds layers of meaning and emotion.
Like, I'm just thinking about a simple question like, are you coming to the party? You could say it in so many different ways.
Totally. You could sound excited, hesitant, unsure, sarcastic. It all depends on your intonation.
Yeah, and the listener picks up on all those subtle cues without even realizing it.
Right. It's like a subconscious dance between the speaker and the listener.
Fascinating. So we've got the basic sounds, word stress, and now intonation. It's like a whole orchestra of elements at play when we speak.
Exactly. And the guide does a great job of showing how all these pieces fit together. They even use a specific sentence to illustrate it.
Oh, I love it when things come full circle. What's the magic sentence?
Can you tell me where the nearest restaurant is?
Okay, yeah. I can already hear how intonation could change the whole vibe of that sentence.
Right. Depending on your intonation, you could sound curious, desperate, annoyed, or even flirty.
It's amazing how much nuance we can pack into a single sentence, and the guide actually breaks down exactly how that sentence works.
They do. They show you where the stress falls, how the intonation changes throughout the sentence. It's really cool to see it all laid out like that.
I bet. So it's not just about learning the rules, but actually seeing them in action.
Yeah. And the guide makes it really clear and easy to understand, even for someone who's not a linguist.
That's great. So I guess we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the basic sounds, word stress, and intonation. But how do we actually use this information to improve our American accent?
Well, that's where the practical tips come in. And that's what we'll dive into next.
Sounds good. I'm ready to put all this knowledge to work.
Me too. Let's get practical. So the guide really emphasizes the importance of practice.
Okay, so like what kind of practice are we talking about?
Well, even practicing individual sounds, like those vowels and consonants we were talking about,
Right.
it can make a huge difference.
It's just like really nailing those sounds.
Exactly. Think of it like learning a musical instrument.
Oh.
You wouldn't jump straight into playing concerto, right?
Right?
You'd start with scales and simple exercises.
I get it. Build those foundations first.
Exactly. And the guide even suggests using a mirror.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know it sounds a little silly,
Yeah.
but it can be really helpful to see how your mouth moves.
Oh, like to make sure you're forming the sounds correctly.
Exactly. It's all about getting that visual feedback.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was learning Spanish,
Huh?
I struggled with that rolled R sound forever
Oh, yeah.
until I actually saw myself doing it in the mirror.
It's like having an instant replay of your own pronunciation.
Right. And then you can adjust and be like, oh, okay, that's what I'm doing wrong.
Exactly. And of course, there's also technology. We've got all these amazing resources now,
Like,
online dictionaries, pronunciation apps. They often have audio examples.
oh, so you can listen and repeat.
Exactly. You can hear how native speakers pronounce those tricky sounds.
That's so helpful,
It-
especially for sounds that don't exist in your own language.
Right. And then there's this technique called shadowing.
Shadowing.
You basically listen to a recording of a native speaker and try to speak along with them.
Like you're their shadow.
Exactly. You're mimicking their pronunciation, their intonation.
Sounds intense.
It's a great way to internalize those subtle nuances of the language.
Yeah, like the rhythm and flow.
Right. And the guide suggests starting with short clips, maybe a sentence or two,
Okay.
and gradually working your way up to longer passages.
Like building up those language muscles.
Exactly. And of course, listening to native speakers is key.
Oh, for sure. I feel like that's how I learned most of what I know about language.
Right. It's the best way to develop your ear for the language.
Especially for things like word stress and intonation.
Yeah. You pick up on those patterns naturally just by listening.
So, what should I be listening to?
Movies, TV shows, podcasts, music even. Just immerse yourself in the language.
Even eavesdropping on conversations.
Well, maybe not in a creepy way,
Right, of course.
but just paying attention to the sounds of language around you.
Okay, so like being more mindful of how people are speaking.
Exactly. Notice how they emphasize certain words, how their voices rise and fall.
It's like turning everyday life into a language learning opportunity.
Exactly. You're surrounded by teachers.
And the guide also mentioned something called the International Phonetic Alphabet.
Oh, yeah, the IPA.
What is that exactly?
It's basically a system of symbols that represents the sounds of spoken language.
Okay, kind of like a code.
Yeah. It's used by linguists, but it can be really helpful for language learners, too.
How so?
While unlike regular spelling, the IPA provides a one-to-one correspondence between symbols and sounds.
So like each symbol represents one specific sound.
Exactly. So once you learn the IPA chart, you can accurately pronounce any word.
Even if you've never seen it before.
Exactly. It's like having a universal key to unlock pronunciation.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
Right. So the guide encourages readers to get familiar with the IPA chart
Okay.
and use it as a reference tool, especially for those tricky sounds.
That's great advice. So we've talked about a lot of different techniques here.
We have.
Practicing individual sounds, shadowing, immersing ourselves in the language, learning the IPA.
It might sound like a lot, but it's all about taking small steps and enjoying the process.
Yeah, not getting overwhelmed.
Right. Because mastering an accent is a journey.
It's not like you just flip a switch and suddenly you sound different.
Exactly. It takes time, patience, and a lot of practice.
And I guess the most important thing is to have fun with it.
Absolutely. Because when you're enjoying the process, you're more likely to stick with it.
Yeah, and you'll actually learn more effectively.
Right. So don't be afraid to experiment, make mistakes, and have fun with the language.
Great advice. It's amazing how we started with the American accent, and we've ended up talking about language as a whole.
It's all connected, isn't it?
Totally. It's like peeling back the layers of something we use every day but don't always stop to think about.
Exactly. And it makes you realize how complex and fascinating language really is.
Definitely. And for people learning a new language or trying to master a specific accent, it can feel a bit overwhelming.
I can imagine. It's a lot to take in.
So where do we even begin?
Well, I think the key is to approach it with a sense of curiosity and playfulness.
Okay, so not getting too caught up in trying to sound perfect.
Exactly. Because, your accent is part of what makes you unique.
Oh, that's a good point. It's like your own personal linguistic fingerprint.
It tells a story about where you're from, the languages you've been exposed to. It's a part of your identity.
I like that. So it's not about erasing our accents or trying to sound like someone else.
Not at all. It's about embracing the diversity of language and recognizing that there's no one right way to speak.
Yeah, because trying to achieve some kind of neutral accent almost feels like losing a part of yourself.
Exactly. It's like trying to fit into a mold instead of celebrating your own unique shape.
And I've been hearing more and more about this idea of intelligibility over accent neutrality.
Oh, absolutely. That's a really important shift in language teaching.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. It basically means focusing on being understood clearly and effectively.
Okay, so regardless of whether you have a noticeable accent,
Precisely. It's about communicating your message confidently and connecting with your audience.
that makes a lot of sense because at the end of the day, the goal is communication.
Exactly. It's about using language to build bridges and connect with others.
Wow, we've come full circle again, haven't we?
We have, from American accents to the very essence of communication.
It's been quite a journey, and I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is this idea of embracing our individuality and using our voices to connect with others in authentic ways.
Beautifully said. And remember, this journey of language learning never really ends.
It's an ongoing process.
Exactly. So keep practicing, keep experimenting, keep playing with language, and most importantly, have fun with it.
I love that. So, to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of language and accents. We hope you've learned something new and feel inspired to keep exploring.